Hey, everybody. It's great to be here. Wow, we got the camera going here. Okay. Okay, so I'm here to talk about personalization at scale. Just to give you a little bit of background on me. So I help to lead our personalization at scale practice at McKinsey. Also help to lead our digital marketing operations and tech group. So I'm kind of spend my days living at that intersection of marketing and technology, right? So turns out this conference is perfect for me, right? If it was that waste management conference down the street, I would have had to make stuff up. Thank goodness that's what we're talking about today. So really excited to sort of get into personalization at scale, sort of talk through what are some of the roadblocks that people typically encounter, and what are some, I'll call, guiding principles that you need to think about as you sort of look to plan how you're going to drive personalization at scale. And yes, I will give you a definition, okay? We're not going to talk all in the clouds. I definitely will talk you through sort of how we view it and what's really involved there. Okay. And by the way, I love the name of this conference. So back in the early days when you could have passwords that were only a couple of characters long, CARMA was like my go-to password. So although I use the K, I don't know. But anyway, nicely done in terms of the naming. All right, let's get into it. We're going to do a little game first. And we only got so much time here, people, so I'm going to kind of like go through this relatively quickly. I want to get to the meat of the content, but I thought it would be fun to do this just to kind of kick things off. Okay, so what percentage of consumers begin their search on Amazon? Now, we don't have time to go through every possibility, but let me see a show of hands. Who here thinks it's 35%? Option A. Ooh, okay. You guys are good. Very good. 55%, right? So 55% of folks are starting on Amazon. Now, okay, great. You're thinking to yourself, oh, I need a consultant from McKinsey to tell me that Amazon has their act together, right? That's probably not a big insight that you're going to run back and tell your boss about. But I do think that it's important to look at what Amazon is doing, to think about the data interoperability that they have in place across channels, even the data fluency, the way that they're using data so effectively to drive personalization across all channels is pretty impressive, right? And the reason why Amazon is also helpful, when I'm in these war rooms with my clients talking about personalization, everybody and their mother is a customer of Amazon, right? So it's a very useful touch point to think about like where you want to get to from a personalization perspective. So let's go to the next one. Okay, so what percent of online and offline sales are influenced by Facebook? I don't know if the Facebook person is still here, but it's okay. We can still talk about them. Let's say people, who thinks 40%? B, option B. Okay. All right, we've got a smattering of hands there. Yeah, C, 50%. So here's the thing about Facebook, right? Facebook and all of these social platforms are critical, right? When you think about personalization at scale, you need to be thinking about how are you activating your data across the digital sort of ecosystem, not simply on your site, but all the other places that your customers are going. And we'll talk about that. All right, so next question. So what percent of customer interactions will be handled without a customer agent in 2020? So let's see, who thinks it's D, 85%? Okay, very few, almost nobody. And yet, here we go, right? So what's the point here? Customer expectations are constantly changing, right? We need to be continuously evolving to become more personalized and more digital. And if you're a bank teller, man, you're in a lot of trouble, right? Time to find a new career. But yeah, that's sort of something that in your personalization planning really need to be thinking about. Next question, how many emails on average do working Americans receive a day? Working Americans, the non-working Americans, wow, it's off the charts. But these guys, let's see. So who thinks it's A, 100? Okay, 130 on average emails. Point here is, and we'll talk more about this, I like the panel discussion we just had, really need to be thinking about how you use personalization to break through the clutter. And trigger-based emails are a very, very effective way to do that. And then what percent of open emails do actually people click on? I'll just go right to the answer because we need to get moving here. 10%, right? So if you want to move from that 10% to 40% or higher, personalization is the way to do that, right? Is going to make that possible. So why personalization, right? It's got some cool stats. Obviously, you need to have stats in these presentations. Heavy stats today. Okay, so hopefully I've checked that box in your minds. So basically, 83% of consumers want personalization, which is nice. There's a win-win here because at the same time, 95% of marketers see it as a priority. So there's good alignment, right? The customers want it, and digital marketers, like everybody in this room, understands that it's a priority. The flip side of that is the other side of this, this equation, right? That we're just not meeting the mark. That from a customer perspective and from a marketer's perspective, we are well below where we need to be in terms of driving personalization at scale. And I'll share a definition of that in a second. So that, my friends, is the opportunity, is how are we going to close that gap so that we're using the customer data we have to drive truly effective personalization across channels. Now let's talk about what that looks like. So how do we define it, right? And everybody's got their own definition. You can go and take this one and tweak it all you want. But really the idea here is using using the data that we have to drive a relevant and consistent experience. Whether it's the content you're showing them, the products you're showing them, the offers you're showing them, this all needs to be grounded on the data that you have about your customers, as well as your prospects, right? Point two is decisioning. It's got to be real time, right? It can't be batch, right? We can't be pushing files around the next day or the next week and waiting for stuff to cross the line. The real-time nature of this is absolutely critical, and it needs to be driven by a centralized decisioning engine. And that's a key point, right? A lot of times I see decisioning happening in individual channels, right, at that channel level, but it's not connected back to any kind of centralized data or decisioning mechanism. So that's part of what we're talking about here, is to be able to centralize all of that. The cross-channel thing is critical, right? So all of you, I bet, can drive personalization in one channel, right? It's probably web, it's probably email, but what about all your channels, right, connected into that centralized decisioning sort of mechanism? What about trying to fix the situation we have today, whereas customers jump from one channel to the next, they get a completely different experience? So I think that's part of that's the bar we're setting, right? That we need to be able to do this across channels. And finally, there's an operating model component to this as well, right? So yeah, I'm a marketing tech guy. That's been my focus for over 25 years. But also, like, a big part of this puzzle is the operating model. How are you as an organization using these tools effectively, right? Let's say you need to increase the metabolic heart rate of marketing. And how do you do that, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So it's a journey, right? Well, if I show up at your company next week and you say, well, Sean, like, how am I doing? Like, how should I think about my personalization efforts? This is where I'm going to start, right? The most highest level. Right? You're going to want to think about the data. So how are you centralizing the data to drive that consistent and relevant experience? Are you pulling all your data into a common repository, right? Decisioning. So have you centralized decisioning? Do you have a decisioning engine in place that's connected to all your channels? Another key component. Distribution. So within each of the distribution channels you have, right, your email platform, your website, your mobile app, are all those things connected back into these centralized data and decisioning components? And then the bottom, design, that really speaks to the design of the experience. So it's an operating model. We needed to have everything start with a D, right? So we took design, we used design here, but really what it's saying is, what's your operating model to, like, make all this sort of work? And I would even have a bonus one that's not even on here, measurement, right? How are you measuring all of this at scale? What kind of feedback loop are you putting in place to be able to continuously optimize across these dimensions? So this is what's at stake, right? And these are pretty high-level stats, so let me make it real for you guys, right? So in January, working with a consumer retailer, we stood up what we call Personalization War Room. We have different teams focused on different customer segments to drive personalization against those segments. You know, it's October. We're 80% towards our goal, of driving impact at scale of 300 million, right? That's what's at stake. If we can set up the operating model to go get that opportunity, to drive the capabilities we need to get there, that's what we're talking about when we talk about personalization. So, I want to leave you with some, well, I'm not leaving yet, by the way, but 4 sort of key things to think about as you kind of like, you go home tonight and you're like, oh, geez, Sean, he got me really psyched up. I want to do this personalization at scale thing. How the heck am I going to do it? Well, these are the 4 kind of key principles that you should be thinking about as you tackle this, right? So one is data activation. Castora's going to love this, right? So look, it's absolutely essential that you're centralizing your data into a single repository, that you're linking that data to customer identity so that you can tell for a given individual up to the moment exactly what is the latest sort of state of your relationship with that person, right? What recently, were they just in your store? Did they just buy something in the store, right? Are they using your mobile app? Are they on the website? All that stuff. It's got to come back into a single repository. It's got to be connected to that customer's identity so that you can then use it to drive personalization across those channels. It's essential, right? And pulling that data back into that common repository not only is essential for driving real-time personalization, it also opens up a whole world of data analytics and insights, right? Your models need to be based on that repository. And to the extent that that repository of data is fully built out, that's going to impact the effectiveness of those models. This is clearly where Castora plays and adds a huge amount of value, right? And so what we're talking about here is pulling all these different data, and that's just a small list here, right? I want all that data, guys. Like, people ask me, Sean, okay, we get it, but like, wow, this is going to take a while. We can't pull everything in right out of the gate. I get it. Prioritize it, right? Go in waves. As marketers, think about the data you care most about. What is the data that if you had it, right, you could unlock value based on that, right? Talk about abandoned browse, abandoned cart, right? So yes, if you had clickstream data, if you had site behavioral information, think of all the things you could do with it. Start there, right? Paid media. If you had all the second-party data streaming in to this repository, you could then use it to drive optimization of your digital media efforts at a customer segment level much more effectively than you do today, right? So think about the use cases. How do you want to use that data? And then bring it into that repository and you start to activate it. This isn't easy, right? But this has got to be the place to start. Like when I do roadmaps, I always start with the data because that affects everything else. So it's pretty important, pretty critical. Number 2 is the signals. So once you get all the data in that repository, it's huge there's gold in them Nar Hills, right? That's where you really want to be looking to drive the next best action for each and every one of your customers. And that's a process, like continuously refining that data. I love that there was discussion about abandoned cart, abandoned browse before, right? If you ask Amazon, Jeff Bezos said that in terms of driving revenue, the trigger emails that drive the most revenue for those guys, abandoned cart, abandoned browse, right? So yeah, you probably all have abandoned cart or abandoned browse emails, but as was said before, there's a whole range of things you could do to improve the effectiveness of those emails. You can also add all kinds of additional triggers, right? Because those are site behavioral triggers. Great, go after it, right? But what about predictive triggers, right? Based on customer modeling that you're doing. What about weather-based triggers, right? Based on the weather conditions where they are. What about life cycle triggers? Based on what life cycle they're in, or maybe just went into or went out of, right? In case of churn types of trigger emails. There is a whole world of opportunity in email triggers, right? And to get to the right side of this diagram and get to these types of results. I walk into clients all the time that are doing the 5 to 15%, right? The campaign stuff. It's just on autopilot, right? They've been doing it all along. But we need to push ourselves to move to the right on this diagram, to truly use data within that email channel to drive much more effective trigger-based emails. And then another way to think about this is the customer journey. We do this a lot. So, because I know it's overwhelming, and I sort of like always this question of like where to start. One place to start is, what are your key customer segments that you really care about? For those key customer segments, break it down. What are all of the interaction points that occur with that customer? And across that continuum, what are the key ones you care about? How are you going to take that customer from a one-category shopper, as this diagram shows, to a three-category shopper, if that's the thing you care about most, right? I know this is kind of confusing to read, but what this basically says is, hey, a three-category shopper is way more valuable for me. They call them an ultra-high value customer than a one category. So as a marketer, I'm going to pin a large share of my marketing efforts against taking somebody from that single category shopper to three or more categories. And if I kind of build everything around those signals, there's kind of a whole world opens up in terms of the way you're guiding your marketing efforts. So I think it's very helpful to kind of break things down across customer segments to kind of map out those journeys, and then really think about the signals that are really going to sort of drive the results that you're looking for. Number 3, agile marketing. So I've spent lots of time going all across the globe to stand up agile marketing teams, and this is a very powerful construct. So to kind of run at the speed and the scale that personalization requires, you're going to need a new operating model. It's just that simple. Can't do things the way we've been doing it all along. Campaigns cannot take weeks to get a new email out there. It just isn't going to scale. So what agile marketing speaks to is, how do we take this construct where everybody's kind of operating in their own little silos, doing their own little thing, it's slow, it takes time, to something more like this, where they're working in a co-located model together as part of a common team. They have a common mandate. They're working against a backlog of tests they want to put into market, and they're ideally launching multiple tests every week, right? That's where we need to get to truly be able to scale this thing. And it's got to be data-driven, right? Can't be doing hunches. Well, I want to put a red call to action on here because everybody likes red. That's going to pop, right? That makes sense. No, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you got to use data to make these decisions. You can put that in red to start, but then you want to read it a couple days later and actually see how that call to action is performing and let the data tell you what to do next. That's the model we're trying to set up here. So we got a video. Check it out.
This is where the concepts of design, engineering, data science, and really just marketing at the center come together. This is the future fighting team. We create these war rooms or these personalization incubators that we talk about where those teams sit. And getting this test and learn and then test again mindset into not months, not years, but actually hours or days is almost a simplified way to say this test and learn and agile muscle is something that will set the winners from the others apart.
The digital war room was an actual physical space. We had to carve out a separate space to bring people together. It had participation from a number of areas, not just our digital marketing team. We brought in product group folks. We brought in decision science folks, .com website UX developers, analysts, legal and compliance were in the room. We brought a real cross-functional approach to this to make sure that in an agile way, we didn't want to waterfall the whole thing and wait for the different steps. We wanted everybody on the team there from the beginning.
The objective of the daily huddle is really to be narrowly focused on what we were solving for the day. So typically you would go around the room and each person would say what they were on point for that day, what they were working to solve, what maybe some of the barriers there were in solving that for the day. And then again, we could continue that process around the room, and each party would kind of speak to what their role was for the day and how they were going to accomplish what they needed to.
The geo-targeted marketing campaigns that we launched started from an insight that, hey, people are looking for a personal experience from the brands that they work with. And one of the easiest ways to personalize is actually to say, like, hey, I'm present where you are. I know that you're sitting today in Cleveland, and I have stuff in Cleveland that works for you. We worked with our media agency and also with Google to pull together all the data at the zip code level to tell us where people were searching from. So once we had that data, we could actually use it to inform our media buys, and we chose specific target markets, Cleveland being one, that we would go after. And if you're searching in Cleveland, we would read that and we would come up with copy that was more personalized to you. Like, hey, we've got a store here in Cleveland, best sellers for you in Cleveland today, that created a much more authentic and personalized experience so that people could feel like, oh wow, this brand is someone who really knows who I am.
There's no longer an acceptance of the status quo, and I think that's something that came from working side by side and realizing how quickly we could get things done if we did it in a collaborative way. In some instances, we had 2 to 3 month time frames to get a test out the door. That went from 2 to 3 months to 1 to 2 weeks, which is obviously speed to revenue. We've also seen double-digit growth in our results, in our test results, and our ability to kind of roll those test results out and gain incremental benefit for the business. It's not 10, 20%. We're talking 200, 300, sometimes 400% increases in traffic, results, pull-through, conversion. And again, continued prioritization of the things that we think have the greatest scale. We now have the ability to know how to do that in a much more methodical way.
Very effective way to be able to drive much more effective personalization, because what you want to be able to be is data-driven, and you want to be able to constantly test different ways that you can use that data to drive a more effective experience. I'm going to skip that slide. 5 minutes, we're going to have to wrap this up and move on to the next piece of content, but I promise you the next 5 minutes are going to be awesome. So, number 4. This is near and dear to my heart, marketing technology, right? Part of this is building new capabilities. Yeah, you got to centralize the data. You have to get it all connected back to your customer's identity and connect it up into each of your in-channel distribution systems, right? We've hit that pretty hard. But at the same time, there are all sorts of capabilities that you need to be putting in place. What I would say here is you need to look across all your in-channel distribution systems, your data, and your sort of decisioning systems, and identify the gaps. So where are the areas where you do not have the marketing tech capabilities that you need to have in place today? I would say, like I said earlier, data is a great place to start. Right? A system like Castora can help you centralize that data and start to activate it. Then I would look at decisioning, right? What level of decisioning do you have in place today, and how have you centralized it? Then I would look at each of the in-channel systems that you have. Your website, what's the state of your A/B testing tool, right? Are you using one? Data management platform, do you have a DMP? Have you fully activated the use of the DMP to drive recognition of anonymous visitors to your site? There's a whole range of marketing technologies that you need to have in place to do this at scale. So to get there, you need to assess your current capabilities, understand where the gaps are, and have a plan to address those gaps over time. The last thing I'll say on this topic is this notion of the translator. Sometimes people call this a marketing technologist. In this new world, people that are able to connect the dots between marketing and technology, who understand how to drive the use of data and the use of these different marketing technology systems, are worth their weight in gold. I can say that because I'm one of those people, right? But I would guess there are also people in this audience that can play that translation function. If I stand up an agile marketing team and I don't have a marketing tech person that can sit in the middle, that crazy Venn diagram, and make those connections between systems, and to sort of translate between the marketing goals and the technical requirements to support them, those teams are going to go 50%. I know we're throwing a lot of percentages at you, but half as fast, right? So we see the marketing technology role as critical within an organization. If you're going to try to drive personalization at scale, you need these people because they're going to kind of help you get the kind of throughput and the kind of results that you're looking for. So finally, don't wait for perfection, right? This is a key point. You're going to be thinking about today and be like, oh man, there's so much I need to do there. Yeah, I get it, but you know what? I guarantee you, if I came to your, I keep saying this, but if I came to your office next week, I could probably find in the first hour or two things that you could start to do today to use the data and the systems that you already have, right? So don't spend all kinds of crazy time trying to do an RFP for a new content management system, right? When the one you already have is probably good enough, probably wasn't implemented correctly, and if you kind of like, set it up properly and started to use all of its capabilities, you could drive a bunch of personalization in the web channel in the next couple of weeks, right? So that's point number one is, yeah, you need a long-term plan, but start with what you've already got. There's a lot of value there. The last thing I'll say is the journey part of this, right? The hardest part is getting started. It seems overwhelming. It's like me doing my taxes. It's why I always do it the night before, right? It's just like, oh man, there's so much behind this. Where do I begin? So here's what I would say, is you need to develop a plan. You need to go across all the different dimensions we talked about: data, decisioning, in-channel distribution, your operating model, measurement, and think about where the gaps are in each of those dimensions, and build a roadmap for how you're going to evolve your capabilities in each of those areas. And be real honest with yourself. Where are those gaps? Where are you falling down? And build a plan for how you will address those gaps. Now, it doesn't have to be right away, like I said, because at the same time, you're going to be, like, in your head, you're going to be, oh, yeah, Sean said I could drive a bunch of value in the next couple weeks. Yeah, do that too, right? Go after the low-hanging fruit, but at the same time, need the longer-term plan, right, for how you're going to kind of like pull all this off and drive this at scale. So if you do all of what I talked about here, you will bridge that gap, right, between what customers are saying about personalization today and where you need to be as an organization. So hopefully that's helpful. I really enjoyed talking to you all today. And on to the next presentation.